Welcome back to another edition of the Knight Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me is my guest co-host, Alec, Rutgers beat reporter. We're going to recap the Rutgers UCLA game a little bit more now that we've had some time to think about it. We're going to talk about everything Greg said in his presser today ahead of the USC game on Friday night. We'll look ahead to some future opponents. We'll talk about a decommitment that happened in the football program for the class of 2025 and more. First, this podcast is presented to you by Knight and Day Apparel. Get ready for football and tailgating season with Knight and Day Apparel. Our apparel is designed to keep you comfortable and stylish from the pregame excitement to the final whistle. Whether you're grilling in the parking lot or cheering from the stands, our high-quality gear has you covered with unbeatable comfort and team spirit. Use our promo code RutgersRivals to get 10% off your purchase. Score big this season and keep chopping with Knight and Day Apparel. This podcast is also presented to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one resource for everything football. BetOnline is every stat, matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. If you think you know your stuff, get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread each week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head to the website today and get on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, Alec. It's been a long 48 hours, roughly, since the game on Saturday. Sometimes my feelings kind of soften over that time, or I kind of like let them distill a bit more or let them age and maybe get more nuance. But I really don't feel a whole lot different now than I did 48 hours ago about this loss. An inexcusable loss, a loss that, sure, we had a ton of injuries, but UCLA did too. UCLA had, I think, almost 20 guys listed as out on the availability report. And I think the most concerning thing for me was just that UCLA just kept doing the same thing over and over, and we couldn't stop it. So it doesn't bode well moving forward, because we're going to be playing some pretty good teams in the last 5 games of the season, starting with USC, which is probably their toughest game left on the schedule on Friday. Have your feelings changed really at all about the game, or what's kind of your general feelings now that you've had some time to think about it?
Honestly, I don't feel much better based on what we saw and what we have seen for the past 3 weeks. It's just a lot of the same feelings, really, where it's just they have to find a way to figure this out. And obviously there's injuries, and we'll talk about what Schiano said in his presser as well today. But it's just, looking back at the game, it's just, they just had so much success through the air, and there was just so many things that, just little things that stacked up on top of each other, and it just snowballed into giving up 35 points to a team that hadn't scored more than 17 all season.
Yep.
We talked about it on the post-game show. Ethan Garbers absolutely lit up Rutgers. He had a career performance, 383 yards, 4 touchdowns, 84% completion percentage. Then he also had 48 yards rushing, including a 49-yard run. I mean, it's just those little things where you see a missed tackle by Desmond Igbenegson on the run, and all of a sudden he's off to the races, and he follows his blockers. You see blown coverage on a simple wheel route out of the backfield that gets left wide open for a 67-yard touchdown. I mean, so many different, delayed screens and things like that, where it's just like they just didn't look disciplined on defense. And that's an indictment on, obviously, the injuries. You're throwing out a lot of guys that hadn't seen a lot of snaps, but it's also an indictment on, and I think we've talked about this a ton in the last week and a half, the depth that this team has, or the lack thereof of depth that this team has. I mean, they just weren't able to get anything done on the pass rush. Once they did get pressure, they got pressure a couple times, but it actually showed once they did get pressure, they had success. That's what they needed to do, and force Ethan Garbers to make a mistake. The problem is it was very far and few in between, and obviously in between those successes, rushing the passer, he picked them apart.
Yep.
I don't have as many negatives for the offense because I think they actually did play one of their best games. Kyle Monangai got over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns, which was good, maybe a little bit too late. Contrary to what many will believe, I actually agreed with the decisions when Greg Schiano decided to go for 2. I thought it made sense in those situations because you're trying to get back in the game and trying to leverage your possessions. That was something that he talked about in the post-game press conference immediately after on Saturday, where the way the game was going, they weren't going to get as many possessions on offense, which was kind of also subtext of we can't get a stop, so we have to make the most of our offensive possessions as we don't have that many. So I didn't disagree with it. Obviously, the execution needs to be better. That's just a big problem. These short yardage situations, Rutgers has not had a lot of success. And I think that's a bigger problem than the decision to go for two. And even the decision to punt, on some of these fourth and shorts, where it's just the execution on those short yardage situations is just not there. And I think that's what people need to focus more on than just the decisions themselves.
Yeah, Rutgers blitzed Ethan Garbers on almost 40% of his dropbacks, and they only got one sack. He completed 86% of his passes when we blitzed him. He was 12 for 14. It was basically the same when not blitzed too. We just couldn't do anything on the defensive line to get some pressure. The only time we did really do anything effectively was kind of late in the game. Keontae Hamilton comes up with one of the better pass rush moves that I've seen in a Rutgers uniform when he was basically like blindly sacking Ethan Garbers and strip sacking him and catching the ball as all in one motion as he hit the ground. You talked about missed tackles. Greg mentioned it in the presser. Missed 14 tackles in the game. This is probably the fourth or fifth game this season where we've missed double-digit tackles. Greg says at each level of the defense, like he expects like 2 missed tackles per game, and that's kind of the acceptable threshold. So that's well above that. I think Ethan might have played his best game in a Scarlet Knights uniform, though. I thought he did really well passing the ball. Obviously, you'd like the one back late where he threw the interception, but that was a really nice disguised coverage by UCLA's safety there. I think Addison's his name. But just in general, like the depth issues were really standing out. We don't have good enough players in our two deep to patch up holes. Because, even it's offense and defense. Like Taj White has started to come around and, has been playing better, but he had a rough start to his career as a starting guard. Linebackers look totally lost. Defensive line can't get a push. Like in the secondary, we've talked about kind of the reasons why you might see a lot more missed tackles in the secondary when your front seven aren't playing well. Typically your safeties and corners are coming in for support in the run plays, and if a running back is coming at you full speed in the second level, it's just a physics thing. You're not gonna make those tackles more often than not. But it was just like everything that seemed that could have gone wrong did on defense. And then the coaching decisions I didn't like either. Like the 4th and 2 at the 48 of UCLA, not going for it when Schiano, openly was talking about knowing he's going to only have a limited amount of possessions in the game. Like there's just like a lot of inconsistency in terms of what he says in these pressers and what he does. And then you'll hear him like talking about certain things. Like in the summer, he was talking about finally having enough depth to feel like he can compete with the Big Ten opponents that they play. And then that depth is non-existent this year. Like, sure, any team's going to struggle when they lose the amount of starters we have. But we had these struggles even when we were only without Mohamed Toure early in the season. Like, we looked slow as hell in game 1 versus Howard. It has nothing to do necessarily with injuries. It's just like we don't look quite right. And, we come into the season banged up. The reason why we're banged up, probably a lot of bad luck, but I think it's fair to question, are we, running these guys too ragged in the preseason, that they're coming in all banged up and maybe we just got lucky last year? I don't know. I'm not at practice. I couldn't tell you if that's 100% the reason, but I think it's fair to ask that question because that's what Schiano was known for in his first time around. I just think the vibes are kind of at an all-time low too. Like I don't see how these guys on a short week, as banged up as they are going to come and play an inspired game against USC. I think Rutgers opened as a 13.5-point dog in this one. And outside of Schiano having like the most insanely inspiring pregame pep talk to his team and, the team having the best set of play or the best set of practices they've had all season, I'm having a hard time not seeing this be a blowout on Friday night. And we'll get more into this game as the week goes on. Thankfully, USC has struggled this season. They're 3-4, believe it or not. They lost Saturday to Maryland in a just a totally gutting loss. I think they were winning by double digits most of the second half, and Maryland just kind of stormed back. But I mean, they have they're going to have even better athletes than UCLA. We weren't able to even come close to stopping them. So I think that's why, like, they run a similar offense, like a lot of crossers. They run a lot of like 4 receiver sets. Like, they're going to play an open, spread out type of game that we just have. You look at Washington, you look at UCLA, like, they've eaten our lunch when they've wanted to do that. On defense, I think in 3 of the last 4 games, our opponents have put up their season high in yardage on us. So that's obviously not a great sign. The lone holdout there was the Nebraska game, where we somehow that's still such a confounding game to me, because we only allowed 186 yards of offense against Nebraska. We only had like 4 missed tackles all game. Like, I don't know what kind of secret stuff they were giving the kids before that game, but that kind of fight has seemingly all but disappeared from this program right now. Is there any other things that are kind of lingering in your mind from the game on Saturday that you feel like you haven't really fully articulated, or you want to kind of take home a little bit further?
I mean, looking at now that, in the post-game show we didn't have this, but now that we have some of the snap counts available, just looking at, where a lot of these guys lined up. Once again, Keontae Hamilton, he was actually the highest graded Rutgers player according to PFF at 87.3, at least on the defensive end. They moved him around a lot again. He lined up in the B-gap 15 times. He lined up as a defensive lineman over a tackle 19 times, and then 18 times he lined up on the outside of a tackle, basically put him at defensive end. So, I guess you got to hope that Wesley Bailey and Aaron Lewis are healthy enough to go on Friday, because, I mean, Keontae Hamilton, I thought he did play very well, but I feel like when you're moving a defensive lineman all around the formation and putting him on the outside a lot more, it's not exactly your best way to win as a pass rusher. Granted, again, Hamilton did play pretty well. He got that strip sack that you talked about earlier. I mean, looking at some of these grades, like Keontae Hamilton, once again, the highest one at 87.3. Dariel Jabome had a 52.3, and Moses Walker had a 47.1. Now, Moses Walker also only played 17 snaps, which surprised me. I thought he was out there a lot more. But I mean, that was mostly due to the return of Tyreen Powell as well. But yeah, it was a struggling day for the defense. I guess all you can do now is move forward. I guess we can segue into talking more about USC. But yeah, I mean, things have to change. You can't have a similar performance. You have to get miles better, really, because that performance was already not good, even before you factor in that USCLA had been a terrible offense coming into the game.
Yeah, they were not very good, and that might have been we might have been the slump buster for UCLA, because they played actually pretty well against Minnesota and got unlucky late. And everybody was, on this podcast was talking about how it was going to be a tougher game than we expected. You saw that reflected in the line as it dropped throughout the week. And sure enough, we were just one possession short, maybe a couple coaching decisions short of winning that game. Before we get into USC, let's talk about what Greg said in his presser today. He seemed more upbeat, but kind of the same. It was more of an upbeat defiance than the just plain negative defiance that he had on Saturday. I felt some of his answers weren't really the nicest way of answering things. Like, I think Brian asked about injuries, and Greg gave him kind of a snarky answer about how, well, we have these things that people wear on their head. There's these hard pieces of plastic, they're helmets, and they have these hard pads, and they're running at each other full speed, and injuries happen. It's like, okay, well, like, thanks for explaining that to us. Or like explaining how there's a lit up thing in the end zone with our name on it and our opponent's name on it, and they put scores up on that. And if our score is, less than the other teams, we lose, and that's not what we want, or something like that. It was just like, come on, man. Like, we've all sung your praises throughout the entire offseason. We've all hyped you up. We've all been on board fully with this special season, and he's fed into it. Like, he was clearly loving, getting asked about like being a dark horse CFB candidate when he was talking to the Big 10 guys at Media Day. Like, you can't like enjoy the positivity, and then when things don't go well, push back on the negativity. Like, that's gonna happen. Like, you can't have a season where you're expected to take the next step forward and flounder and not expect some blowback. And to kind of push back on the media for this just doesn't really feel like a good calculated move on his part, but that's kind of how he's choosing to handle this. What were some of the things that he said at his presser that was interesting to you, Alec?
Obviously, those couple things that you pointed out, I couldn't help but chuckle a little bit when I was listening. Also, the fact that they are leaving Wednesday instead of Thursday. He talked a lot about how they operate on Rutgers time, but in this situation, it doesn't really work out that well. Trying to figure out the 74 guys to put on the plane to go to USC also is going to be a challenge based on the injuries. And again, you have that one less day to prepare. The last couple of weeks didn't have any travel days, and you're still dealing with those injuries, and now you have even less time when you factor in the travel day. And then also, well, by the way, it's a Friday night game too. One thing that kind of made me laugh as well, where he said, we got to operate. You got to go out a day earlier so we can operate on the time, as the game. He said, I don't trust my own decision making at 2:30 in the morning, and I don't trust my players' decision making at 2:30 in the morning either. I don't blame him for that. I just thought it was interesting how he went a lot more in depth about certain things than I would have expected, like the travel stuff and the injury stuff. I mean, the other answer that kind of stuck out to me, he talked about, why he talked about some of his remarks post game on Saturday and how, his talking about the trajectory of the program and how, it's not just him trying to be sarcastic or him trying to, rally everyone or whatever. It's what he honestly believes because he's out there in practice. I thought that was interesting as well. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. I am not overly confident going into this game because, like Schiano said, that is a really talented team that they're going up against. I thought the offense has been hit or miss at times, but it's mostly been hitting. Miller Moss has grown really well and taken over for Caleb Williams. I think their defense has been much improved after stealing D'Anton Lynn from UCLA. Granted, they've had a lot of problems closing games, but if Rutgers can't keep it competitive like they were not able to do the last 2 weeks, then that's not going to matter. So,
yeah, USC in its last 5 have gone 1-4. They have allowed a decent amount of points to be scored, and they have kind of fallen apart late in games. Like I said previously, they were up by, I think, 2 scores against Maryland late in the game and blew it. They were up by 2 scores against Penn State in the second half and blew it. They were up by at least a score in the fourth quarter against Minnesota, and blew it. So they were up.
I think 17, you can say the same about Michigan too.
Yeah, so they were up 17-10 going into the fourth quarter against Minnesota. They were up 24-20 late in the fourth quarter against Michigan before they lost. They were up 23-20 going into the fourth quarter against Penn State. They were up 28-14 against Maryland with 13 minutes left in the game and ended up losing. So they've just found a way to lose any game that was close late in the game. So I guess that's one caveat. If Rutgers can keep it close, maybe they'll have a chance. I just have a hard time imagining they can keep it close. Because even if you look at like Wisconsin, when they played USC played a pretty gross first half. Wisconsin went into the halftime up 21-10, and then USC scored 28 unanswered in the second half to kind of win that one going away. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I don't necessarily feel great about this game. I say necessarily. I feel really, really, really bad about this game. I just have a bad feeling that it's going to be the worst game that Rutgers has played all year, and that includes Wisconsin. I don't know if the margin will be as big, but I think it might be a worse looking game.
I will say there is one thing that kind of sticks out as interesting to me. A lot of the season, particularly against UCLA, it felt like Rutgers was really in a rhythm, especially passing the ball when they went up tempo. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if we'll see a little bit more of that this week. They haven't done it a whole lot in the entire season, but they did it at times late in the game and late in the first half against UCLA, and they actually had a lot of success with it when they were going with the quick game, moving up to the line quickly and getting the snap off. I thought they got a lot of success. I thought Ethan looked really comfortable operating in that high tempo. So I don't know if it's something that we'll see consistently, but I think they need to do it at least a little bit more just to manufacture some easy plays so they don't get far behind the chains as they have been these last few games. And honestly, it can also help give the defense a rest if they are moving quickly down the field. They're still moving down the field and taking longer on these drives. So I hope we see more of it, and I think we'll see at least a little bit of it in some of those situations where you need the quick 2-minute drill. And I think we'll see a lot of the same looks where, we see some motion, particularly with Demir Miller and Christian Dremel. We see them kind of rotating in and outside because it was working. I've said this a bunch of times. I thought the offense played well enough to win on Saturday. Now it's just up to the defense. Can they improve on a short week against a much better offense? And when you say it like that, it doesn't look too good, but they have to find a way.
Yeah, let's hope that they can find a way. But we will talk more about that game later in the week when we have a beat reporter on from USC to kind of talk us through the matchup from their perspective. Rutgers football lost a commitment this past weekend, or I guess last night. They lost a commitment in Kaylib Singleton, who there was a lot of scuttlebutt about him visiting Florida. I think he did visit Florida, and he reaffirmed his commitment, and then he decommitted yesterday. He is a 3-star corner out of somewhere in Florida. I don't have his profile up right now. I'm trying to get that as we speak. But, you don't want to ever lose guys. I think it's probably more that he wants to stay home and he has a pretty big time offer from Florida. But what's your kind of take on losing Kaylib Singleton?
Yeah, it definitely is. It's never great to lose a commitment, obviously, but this is probably the main way. If you had to choose, this is the way you choose, where a guy just wants to stay home, close to home. He goes to Oakleaf High School in Orange Park, Florida. That's where he's from. It's about an hour and a half from Gainesville, so pretty close. And again, when you're recruiting out of state like that, it's always tough to hold off, especially when you have a state like Florida with so many football powers. It's always tough to hold off some of those, those hometown teams. He did visit Florida this past weekend, so I'm sure that they really convinced him and put him, over the edge to decommit from Rutgers and probably end up there as well. I know Richie has said it a ton on the podcast, on the boards, and in Discord too. It's these decommitments, they rarely happen because of a singular game or a singular losing streak like Rutgers is on now. Or even, he said, sometimes even one season, that's not why they decommit. It doesn't impact as much of a thought to recruits as one may think. It's not like they're watching the defense, give up 35 points to UCLA and they say, you know what, screw this, I'm out, I'm going elsewhere. It's a long process, and that's part of the reason, part of the pitch for recruiting is a long process where we are going to develop you over multiple years and get you to the pros as your main goal. So the sky is to take a word from Greg Schiano, the sky is not falling, at least right now, what I'm talking about when it comes to recruiting. Obviously, losing a couple of defensive backs is tough, but Rutgers has shown that they can develop defensive backs very well, particularly under Greg Schiano. And they can find guys in the portal, too. So I'm not too worried. Obviously, it stinks to lose a commitment like Kaylib Singleton. And this is a guy I think was a little bit under-recruited as well. He had begun to kind of turn some heads as like one of those underrated guys. Obviously, it stinks to lose, but can't really blame a guy. I'm sure if it was the other way around, a guy is committed to, I don't know, let's say Ohio State or not Ohio State, because that's a whole different plane of football program. Let's say a guy was committed to, I don't know, Indiana. He's from, goes to Don Bosco or whatever. And he decided to visit for a game and decide, I want to stay home and play for Rutgers, and can't really blame him. And that's just kind of how it works.
Yeah, and that happens almost every year, and Rutgers fans, love to see that, and I do too. And it sucks to lose anybody, like you said, but it's tough to when the hometown school wants you to say no to that, regardless of money situations or anything like that. So we'll see. Obviously, losing 2 defensive backs now in the class, I imagine they'll probably look for a replacement somewhere. We'll have more information on that when we get it in terms of targets, and maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just decide to use those scholarships in the portal instead. But we will.
They still have 27. They still have 27 commits in the class. So again, the sky is not falling. And for defensive backs, they still have Michael Clayton, Stretch Dorillis, Tariq Hayer as those defensive backs. And like I said, they'll probably go into the portal and get a couple over the next couple of years too. So I'm not too worried, and I don't think too many people should be either.
Yep, totally agree. That's kind of all I got for today. Alec, was there anything that you wanted to touch on before we head out of here that we haven't talked about?
Let's see. Well, we already talked a lot about basketball. I'll have an article out probably tomorrow morning talking more about the scrimmage because we just want Rutgers basketball so bad. We gotta try to get everything out of it. Rutgers women's basketball media day will be tomorrow in the afternoon. So Coquise Washington will speak with the media. We'll have a video up with that, I'm sure. Assistant coaches will also be available, which I don't believe was the case last year, so that would be interesting. And then there's going to be groups of 6 players available as well as the media day goes on. So we'll definitely have a lot of stuff from that. So if you're wondering about the Rutgers women's basketball team as well as the men's basketball team, be sure to be on the lookout for that. Rutgers women's soccer got back in the win column yesterday. I was a last-minute fill-in on the Big Ten Plus broadcast. So if you were thinking to yourself, wow, if you're watching that game and thinking to yourself, wow, who is this guy? He sucks. He sounds like he's never done this before. This is only my, third time broadcasting soccer. So, I have not done this all that much before. But anyways, yeah, it was a fun game. Riley Tiernan had a goal and an assist. I believe she is in the top 10 in career points. I believe she's 8th now, I want to say. Feel free to look that up. But yeah, she had a really good game. Rutgers got back in the win column. They had their unbeaten streak that lasted almost 6 weeks snapped last weekend when they lost 2 straight. And now they got back in the win column. Their last game is next Sunday at home against Maryland. Yeah, that's. I think that's about all I got for today.
The last thing I guess I'll touch on is sorry to the Giants fans who had to endure the Saquon homecoming yesterday. I'm sure that wasn't fun to watch, but
including one of ours who couldn't make it today.
Yeah, he was at the game, and I think he maybe had a little too much fun at that game. But and I say that tongue in cheek.
At least the Seahawks got back on track.
They did, yeah. You guys blew out the Falcons on the road, so I guess a good NFL weekend for us, for the two people who were here.
Yeah, it's an improvement from last week when I was ready to throw my Seahawks pillow out of the window. But let's see. I mean, Chris Newoli committed last night. We already released our instant reaction to that, but that was another solid get. He actually announced it on ESPN2, so that's always cool to get some national attention on the program. So that's pretty cool. Lino Mark was actually with him, came out and supported him when he committed. So there's a video of that on Twitter too. So always cool to see. Yeah, I think that's all I got. Yeah,
it's cool that the World Series will be the undercard to the Rutgers USC game on Friday night. Maybe that'll draw down some of the attendance for the USC football game because one, they're playing poorly, and two, the Dodgers are playing in Chavez Ravine a few miles away. So it's a cool New York LA battle doubleheader on Friday night on Fox. So
yeah.
All right, well, that's all we got. Thanks once again for listening. We are still running that giveaway contest for the Ace Bailey High School replica jersey and the Dylan Harper replica high school jerseys. We'll have one winner of each. If you want to get involved in that, there's 2 ways. First way, leave a 5-star review on the Apple podcasting app for our podcast. Reference Rutgers Madness. That'll get you 2 entries to the contest. And the other way to enter is by leaving a comment on the YouTube video below, mentioning Rutgers Madness. That'll get you 1 entry. And we will announce the winner ahead of the basketball season starting November 6th. So the podcast before the season opens up is when we'll do that. Date TBD, but it's coming up. It's just a few weeks away, less than 3 weeks at this point. So really excited for hoop season, and we'll see how things go.
I want to put it out there. Anyone that saw my tweet about 2 weeks and 13 days until Wagner, I don't really know what I was thinking with that, because I don't even know if that was the right amount of days either. But yeah, I don't know what was going through my mind. But yeah, we're getting closer. I think it's what, 2 weeks and 2 days, I want to say. So
yeah,
it's exciting.
Can't wait. All right, everybody. Thanks again for listening. For me and Alec, this has been another edition of the Knight Report podcast. Signing off.